So, a bit of context, I'm a 27-year-old guy who works in a fairly chill office environment. My boss is this no-nonsense woman, maybe in her mid-40s, who's very professional and gets straight to the point. She's one of those bosses you don't really joke around with because she's always in work mode, which is fine. She's really competent at her job, so I never really question her decisions. I've been dating my girlfriend, Maya, for almost a year now, and we have a pretty solid relationship. We've had our ups and downs like any couple, but overall, things are going great. She's sweet, funny, and can make me laugh at the drop of a hat. Now, this is where everything went sideways. A few days ago, I was sitting at my desk after a long day of work. It was a quiet evening, and I figured I'd knock out a quick text to Maya. We've been having some great moments lately, and I wanted to send her a little something special to make her smile. I was feeling extra sappy and decided to send a love letter. So, I whipped up this heartfelt message about how much I appreciate her, how much she means to me, and how I look forward to growing together. Real romantic stuff. I had been chatting with Maya earlier that day, and we were discussing how cute it was when I sent her good morning texts with little notes attached to them. She said she thought it was the sweetest thing, so I figured a more substantial letter was a nice gesture. Anyway, I typed out this big, sappy love letter in a text message on my phone, carefully crafting every word. After about 15 minutes, I was really happy with the way it turned out. It felt genuine and thoughtful. I was about to hit send when I got distracted by a notification on my work computer. I glanced at the screen and saw that my boss had sent me an email asking about the status of a report I had been working on. She wanted it by the end of the day, and since I had procrastinated a bit, I was in a bit of a rush. I quickly finished the email to her, attached the file, and hit send. Now, here's where the mistake happened. I had also been messaging Maya earlier that day, and I had the love letter open in the background of my phone. I had just switched from the email app to my messaging app to send the love letter when I saw that Maya had texted me back. I got distracted by her reply and immediately started typing a response, which was about something totally different. In the heat of the moment, I didn't notice that my email app had opened again on my phone. While my focus was on the text to Maya, I mindlessly tapped send on the first message that was open in my email app, thinking it was her chat. What I didn't realize was that I had just sent my heartfelt love letter to my boss instead of my girlfriend. I didn't even notice until I got a reply a few minutes later. It wasn't a long response, but it was a single line that made my stomach drop when I saw it. My boss had replied, "Thanks for sharing, I didn't know you felt that way." I stared at the screen in horror for a few moments, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Then, panic set in as I realized I had just sent an incredibly personal and intimate message to my boss, someone who I had never shared anything like that with. I had essentially confessed my feelings, albeit in a general way about life and love, to a woman I respect professionally but have no personal relationship with. I immediately went into damage control mode. I scrambled to send her another email, trying to cover up the mistake. I tried to sound calm, cool, and collected in my attempt to salvage the situation. "Hey, sorry. That wasn't meant for you. I was replying to a message for my girlfriend. Please disregard the last email." I reread the message, sat there for a second, and then thought to myself, no, that's not enough. She's going to think I'm some weird guy now. So I quickly typed again. "Please ignore that last email. That was a personal message I meant to send to someone else." Totally unprofessional, I know. I'm so embarrassed. Please don't judge me. I hit send, praying that she wouldn't think I was completely out of my mind. I didn't get a response right away, and the silence was unbearable. For the next few hours, I just stared at my screen, pretending to work while my mind kept racing. Every time I heard a notification, my heart skipped a beat, thinking it was my boss finally responding. Eventually, she did reply. The email came in a little later than I expected, and I clicked on it, hoping for the best. Noted. Let's talk about the report tomorrow. I couldn't tell if she was just being professional or if she was trying to be polite, pretending the whole thing didn't happen. Either way, I felt like I had somehow avoided a major disaster, but I wasn't sure how much damage had been done behind the scenes. The next day at work was excruciating. Every time I saw my boss in the hallway or had to interact with her, I felt like I was walking on eggshells. I was paranoid that she was secretly judging me, thinking I was a weird, overly emotional guy who couldn't distinguish between work emails and personal messages. I tried to be as professional as possible, but I couldn't shake the anxiety. Luckily, after a couple of days of awkward exchanges, things seemed to return to normal. We carried on with our work, and I never heard anything more about the love letter incident. It was like it never happened, at least as far as I could tell. I'm still not sure if my boss just let it slide or if she secretly thinks I'm an emotional mess who can't use email correctly. But one thing's for sure, sending personal messages from my work email to anyone, especially my boss, is something I'll never do again. So, yeah, that's my TIFU. I sent a love letter to my boss, and now I'll never be able to look her in the eye the same way again. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. So, I, 24M, decided to try something bold and spontaneous for my second date with this amazing girl I met on Bumble, Sarah, 22F. She seemed fun and easygoing, and I was really excited about the potential of this relationship. We'd been chatting for a week, and after a few nice conversations and an equally fun first date, I thought it would be a great idea to do something out of the ordinary to impress her. I didn't want to go the usual route of dinner and a movie. I wanted something that would show I was adventurous and spontaneous, two qualities I thought would make me seem a lot cooler than I probably am. I've always been a bit of a try-anything-once kind of guy, and I thought, hey, maybe a little adrenaline wouldn't hurt. I had been thinking of doing something a bit extreme but hadn't fully committed to the idea. That's when I remembered my friend, Greg, who was into bungee jumping. Greg had mentioned it once or twice in passing, and although I wasn't super familiar with it, the idea of doing something so thrilling seemed perfect. So, I texted Greg that evening to ask him about bungee jumping. He told me he knew a great place near a scenic cliff about an hour's drive from the city. It had a fantastic reputation, with great views, and the staff was known to be highly experienced. I figured this would be perfect. I could impress Sarah with my spontaneous decision to take us on a bungee jumping adventure. I mean, who wouldn't be impressed by that? The next day, I texted Sarah, asking if she'd be up for something crazy and adventurous. She replied almost immediately with an enthusiastic "Sure, what did you have in mind?" I had already committed, so I told her I had found this amazing bungee jumping spot and that it would be a thrilling experience. She was hesitant at first, but after I reassured her that it was perfectly safe and the company was highly reputable, she reluctantly agreed. We set off that afternoon, and after a scenic drive, we arrived at the bungee jumping place. The atmosphere was relaxed, the staff were super friendly, and the place looked way more professional than I had imagined. We signed our waivers, got suited up, and met the instructor, who was this extremely fit, enthusiastic guy in his late 30s. He had this vibe of confidence that made me feel even more hyped about the whole thing. Then came the moment where I thought I was about to be a hero. The instructor casually mentioned that while bungee jumping was safe, they had a special challenge for those who wanted to push their limits even further. Apparently, they had a bungee jump called the Daredevil Special, which involved jumping without the usual harness system. Instead, you would just be strapped into the bungee cord at the waist with a simple belt and freefall directly into the water below. The instructor warned us it was a bit more extreme but promised it was just as safe, with no risk of injury as long as we followed the instructions carefully. I thought this was the perfect way to show Sarah how brave I was. I didn't even think twice before saying, "Let's do it." Sarah immediately looked a little freaked out but tried to hide it with a nervous laugh. I brushed it off, telling her, "It'll be fine, just follow my lead." We walked over to the jump platform, and I could feel my heart racing. The view was incredible, but my nerves were creeping up on me. Still, I was committed. I couldn't back out now. I was on a mission to impress, and this was my moment. I went first, naturally. The instructor helped me strap into the harness and the waist belt, giving me a couple of tips about the jump. I tried to look confident, even though I could feel the blood rushing to my head. My palms were sweaty, and my thoughts kept racing. Is this going to be okay? Am I actually doing this? Then it was time. The instructor gave me a reassuring nod, and before I could even process what was happening, I was walking to the edge of the platform. I looked down, and the drop was a lot higher than I had anticipated. I tried to stay calm and reminded myself that I was about to do something that would absolutely blow Sarah's mind. With a deep breath, I jumped. Everything went black for a split second, then the rush of air hit me, and I felt the sharp tug of the bungee cord as it yanked me upward, sending me hurtling back into the sky. For a brief moment, I felt like I was flying, like nothing could stop me. But then, suddenly, everything went wrong. I hadn't been paying close enough attention to the positioning of the bungee cord. As I soared back up into the air, I realized my waist strap had slipped down to my hips. My body was contorting in a way I wasn't prepared for, and I had no control over my movements. Panic set in as I felt myself being yanked and twisted in the air. For what felt like an eternity, I was spinning uncontrollably, struggling to breathe as the cord jerked me back and forth. To make things worse, my legs flailed, and one of them got caught in the cord. The instructor, who had been standing on the platform, started yelling something, but I couldn't hear him over the wind and my own panic. Eventually, the cord snapped me back to the platform, and I was yanked down with a sickening thud. I slammed into the platform, my head spinning, my body aching. The next few moments were a blur. I was lying on the ground, dazed, my legs still tangled in the bungee cord. The instructor rushed over to me, asking if I was okay, but all I could do was groan. My legs were sore, my head was pounding, and I felt like I might pass out. He quickly helped untangle me and got me back up on my feet, but it was clear I had taken a nasty fall. They rushed me to the medical tent, and Sarah was freaking out. I could tell she was concerned, but I couldn't even focus on her. The pain in my head and legs was too intense, and I could tell something wasn't right. After some quick checks, the staff decided to send me to the hospital for further evaluation. I ended up with a mild concussion and a sprained ankle, but thankfully, nothing more serious. Sarah stayed by my side the entire time, and even though she was really quiet, I could tell she was relieved I was okay. I had done everything I could to impress her, but now I felt like an idiot. The whole experience was a disaster, uncomfortable, painful, and, honestly, embarrassing. Long story short, I tried to be bold and adventurous, but in the end, I only ended up impressing her with my ability to make poor decisions. The date ended with me in the hospital, and while Sarah was kind enough to offer to drive me home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had completely ruined my chances with her. We've texted a few times since, but I'm pretty sure that was the last date. So, if you ever think about doing something extreme to impress someone, just remember, not everything that seems like a good idea at the time actually is. And if you end up in the hospital trying to impress someone, you'll probably just end up single. TIFU by thinking it was a good idea to surprise my girlfriend with a romantic scavenger hunt that ended in disaster. So, I've always been a pretty spontaneous guy, and I like to think I'm pretty good at surprising people, especially my girlfriend, Sarah. We've been dating for over 2 years, and I like to make an effort with little gestures to keep things interesting. Normally, this works out well, you know, flowers, cute dates, maybe a surprise dinner every now and then. But last weekend, I thought I could really impress her with something a bit more extravagant. It all started when I remembered an old movie scene where a guy set up a scavenger hunt for his girlfriend, leading her through places that meant something to them as a couple. I thought, I can totally do this. How hard could it be to pull off a fun, personalized scavenger hunt? I had the entire weekend free, so I thought I'd go all out. I was determined to make it the best surprise ever. I spent hours planning it out. First, I'd have to leave little clues at different places she visits regularly: her favorite coffee shop, the park we first met at, the bookstore where she likes to hang out. I thought it would be cute to include little personal touches, things that only we would recognize. Like a reference to that inside joke about a book we read together, or a specific lyric from a song we both love. I thought it was a brilliant idea. After brainstorming, I headed out early in the morning to put everything into motion. I wanted everything to be set up by the time Sarah woke up, so she wouldn't suspect anything. I wrote little notes, carefully crafted them with her favorite colors, and made sure the handwriting was perfect, because she's got a thing for neat handwriting. Then I drove to all the locations, each one more carefully planned than the last. At each stop, I left a note with a clue leading to the next spot. I was on fire, feeling like a goddamn romantic genius. I even had a grand finale planned at the end of the hunt, where I would be waiting with a picnic set up at a scenic overlook. Around 1 p.m., everything was set, and I couldn't wait to see her reaction. The only thing left was to wait for her to get the first clue. I'd already sent her a text telling her to check her favorite coffee shop for a special note. It would start with a simple riddle leading her to the next location. I figured she'd love the thrill of the hunt. Then, I got a text from Sarah. "Hey, babe. What's going on today?" "I'm just heading to the gym." My heart sank a little. I had completely forgotten about her morning routine. She'd already planned to go to the gym before anything else. That meant she wasn't starting the scavenger hunt at the coffee shop like I'd hoped. Panic set in. I quickly tried to think on my feet. Maybe I could have her meet me at the park after her workout, but that would throw off the whole flow of things. Then I realized something. I had no idea what time she'd be done at the gym. My meticulously planned scavenger hunt was already behind schedule, and I had no control over when she'd start. So, I did what any rational person would do. I panicked and tried to text her the first clue in advance. I sent it while frantically pacing around my apartment, hoping she'd pick up on the hidden meaning in the text and go to the right place. Spoiler alert, she didn't. By the time she texted me back, she had already gone to the coffee shop and was sitting there, waiting for me. I didn't want to leave her hanging, so I called her and tried to play it off as if I was just giving her a hint. The problem was, she didn't want a hint. She wanted to know why she was sitting at the coffee shop alone instead of following the clues. I was in full-blown panic mode at this point, and my explanations were getting more convoluted by the second. I told her to just wait for me to come meet her. But when I got there, I realized my first mistake: she had already bought her coffee. No big deal, right? But then, she saw the coffee shop clerk who had been in on my plan. The one I had asked to hand her the first clue when she ordered her usual latte. Turns out, Sarah had been talking to this guy the entire time, and he was clueless about the scavenger hunt. She was now suspicious about why this random barista was involved in my weirdly cryptic love puzzle. I tried to play it cool, but my mind was racing. She could tell something was off. She asked me if this was a surprise or if I was trying to prank her. I laughed awkwardly and tried to explain the whole idea, but she wasn't having it. The more I explained, the worse it got. Eventually, we left the coffee shop, but the vibe was all wrong. She was no longer impressed by my romantic gesture, she was just confused and frustrated. To make matters worse, I realized that the rest of the hunt was set up in a linear fashion, and now we were skipping places left and right. The bookstore wasn't even on the way to the park. I had to figure out how to make it all work while she sat in the car, staring out the window with a look of disbelief. My brilliant, romantic scavenger hunt had turned into a logistical nightmare. To make things even worse, at the park, which was supposed to be the second to last stop, I went to grab the final clue from the bench where I'd hidden it, only to find that a random jogger had picked it up and was now staring at me like I was some kind of lunatic. He was holding my little clue, completely confused by the whole thing, and asked if I'd lost my keys or something. At that point, I had no choice but to admit defeat. The scavenger hunt was over before it even really began. My grand finale picnic at the Overlook was a bust. We ended up getting takeout and eating it at home in silence, while I mentally kicked myself for ruining what was supposed to be a cute and fun day. Needless to say, Sarah wasn't exactly thrilled with how everything went. She tried to be understanding, but I could tell she was still trying to figure out why I thought this whole mess was a good idea. I learned a valuable lesson that day: sometimes, less is more. And, apparently, surprise scavenger hunts are a lot harder than they look. I don't know if I'll ever live this one down. If she's still talking to me after this, I'll consider it a miracle. But hey, at least I got a funny story out of it, right? TIFU by trying to impress my girlfriend with a romantic dinner, and accidentally starting a small kitchen fire. So, a little background: my girlfriend, Sarah, and I have been dating for about 6 months. Everything has been going great so far, but I knew that she had always talked about how much she loved when her ex-boyfriend would cook her nice dinners. I'm not the most skilled cook in the world, but I thought this could be a chance for me to show her I could be thoughtful and maybe even better than her ex at this whole romantic dinner thing. I had recently watched a couple of YouTube tutorials and read a few recipes online, so I figured I was good to go. It all started last Saturday. I had the entire day to prepare for the dinner, and I planned the whole thing out. I wanted to make her favorite meal, which, as I learned through our conversations, was a classic Italian pasta dish, spaghetti carbonara. Seemed simple enough, right? The only problem was that I had never actually made it before, and my experience in the kitchen was limited to making grilled cheese sandwiches and heating up frozen pizza. Anyway, I went to the grocery store, loaded up with all the ingredients, and set about prepping for the evening. I'd been watching cooking videos all morning and felt pretty confident. I had my plan: I would make everything from scratch, impress her with my cooking skills, and serve it with a nice glass of red wine. What could go wrong? I started with the pasta. It was pretty straightforward: boil the water, add the pasta, and cook it. Simple. I moved on to the next step: making the sauce. The sauce was where things started to get a little complicated. You see, carbonara sauce is a delicate mix of eggs, cheese, and pancetta, and you have to be careful about timing and temperature to avoid scrambling the eggs. I had watched a video where the chef made it look easy, but of course, I didn't factor in my own nerves and the sheer pressure of impressing my girlfriend. So I fried the pancetta in a pan to get it crispy. Now, here's where I made my first mistake. I didn't realize that the oil from the pancetta would splatter all over the stovetop, and I didn't think to clean it up right away. I moved on to the next step, which was to beat the eggs and cheese together. Everything was going okay up until this point, but the tension in my mind was building. I could already picture Sarah's face when I presented this perfect meal to her. The image of her ex, who apparently always cooked for her, kept haunting me, so I was determined to one-up him. Big mistake. As I poured the pancetta into the egg and cheese mixture, I had to quickly mix it all together to avoid the eggs cooking too fast. But I didn't anticipate how much heat was still in the pancetta, and before I knew it, I had a few scrambled bits of egg in the mix. It was looking a little too clumpy, but I tried to salvage it. I stirred and stirred, telling myself that it would all come together when I added the pasta. Now, here's where everything went off the rails. I went to check on the pasta, and somehow, in my flurry of activity, I forgot about the pan with the pancetta oil splatter. It wasn't until I smelled something burning that I realized the oil on the stovetop had caught fire. Not a huge blaze, but a decent little flame was licking the side of the stove. Panicking, I grabbed a towel, tried to smother it, and knocked the towel into the sink. But by now, I was making a bigger mess than a fire extinguisher could solve. I yanked the pan off the burner, but that only spread the fire across the stovetop. It was small, but it was real. It could have easily become a much bigger problem. In the chaos, I realized I had to calm down. I turned off the burner, grabbed the fire extinguisher from the pantry. I had one because I'm paranoid about safety, but who actually thinks they'll need it, and put out the flames. But now, everything was a disaster. The stovetop was covered in soot, the pan was ruined, and the entire kitchen smelled like burnt oil. Not exactly the romantic setting I had envisioned. At this point, I realized there was no saving the meal. My romantic dinner was ruined. But Sarah was on her way over, and I couldn't let her know I had turned our kitchen into a small disaster zone. I quickly cleaned up the mess as best as I could, and then realized I still had the pasta sitting in the colander. I grabbed it, trying to salvage something, but the sauce I had so carefully prepared had turned into a lumpy mess. There was no way this was going to work. When Sarah arrived, I greeted her at the door with a smile that I'm sure looked like a mixture of fear and false excitement. She walked in, took a deep breath, and said, "Wow, it smells like something happened in here." I immediately tried to cover up the mess. "Oh, just trying to add a little flair to the evening, you know? A bit of that chef's touch." Her eyes widened. "What happened?" "It smells like something's burnt." I tried to laugh it off. No, everything's fine. Just a little kitchen mishap. The most important thing is dinner," I said as I dramatically gestured toward the table. I sat her down, and at that point, I really wished I had just ordered takeout. The pasta was overcooked, the sauce was terrible, and I could tell she wasn't buying my attempts at playing it off as a creative dish. I had no idea how to recover from this. Every bite she took seemed to say, "What on earth is this?" By the time we got to dessert, which I had also ruined, I knew this was a lost cause. She smiled politely, but there was an awkward silence between us. I felt like I had let her down. Finally, after dinner, she hugged me and said, "You know, it was a really sweet gesture. But maybe next time, just order some pizza?" I felt like such an idiot. I had gone from thinking I could be a master chef to barely keeping my dignity intact. And to make matters worse, she ended up taking over the kitchen the next day to make her own version of carbonara, which, of course, was 1,000 times better than my attempt. So yeah, lesson learned. Sometimes it's better to leave the cooking to the experts, or at least the people who aren't trying to impress their girlfriends by recreating a fancy dish they've never cooked before. TLDR, tried to impress my girlfriend by cooking her favorite dish, started a fire, ruined dinner, and learned I'm not ready to become a chef. So this happened a few weeks ago, and it's one of those stories that I'm still cringing about every time I think about it. I'll start by saying that I was trying to do something nice for my crush, who I had known for a while but never really had a chance to hang out with outside of work. We were both in our late 20s, and we had worked together for a few years at this small company where everyone pretty much knew each other, but we hadn't really gotten close. Anyway, a few weeks ago, I got the idea that maybe I could finally make my move. I've always thought she was amazing, smart, funny, and, let's be honest, just plain gorgeous. But for whatever reason, I had never really gotten past the friend zone. Then, one day, we were chatting about food, and she mentioned that she loved homemade meals. She casually said something like, "I think cooking is such a personal thing, you know? When someone cooks for you, it feels like they really care about you." I don't know why, but it was like a light bulb went off. In my head, I thought, okay, this is my chance. If I cook her a nice dinner, she'll realize I'm not just some average guy at work, I'm a guy who can cook. A guy who cares. A guy who might just be her future boyfriend. Big mistake. So, the plan was set. I would invite her over for a homemade dinner, cook something impressive, and hopefully make a lasting impression. I'm not a terrible cook, but I'm definitely not a chef. I can make the basics, pasta, chicken, some stir-fries, you know the deal. But I wanted to go above and beyond. I wanted this to be the meal that would make her swoon. After much deliberation, I decided to make a 3-course meal, a fancy appetizer, a hearty main dish, and a homemade dessert that would make her feel like she was eating in a 5-star restaurant. The appetizer was going to be some homemade bruschetta, The main dish would be chicken piccata with roasted vegetables, and for dessert, I decided on a classic chocolate lava cake. Simple enough, right? I was confident that I could pull it off. I started shopping for ingredients, and that's when things started to go off the rails. I'm usually decent at following recipes, but when I got into the store, I somehow convinced myself that I should buy only the best, most expensive ingredients to really show her I was serious about impressing her. I grabbed the most expensive olive oil, the fanciest chicken breasts, organic lemons, because apparently that's what real cooks use, and the finest dark chocolate I could find. I had no idea what I was doing, this was just the stuff that seemed right. The day of the dinner arrived, and I had the entire day off to prep and cook. My crush was scheduled to arrive around 7 p.m., so I figured I'd start cooking early to make sure everything was perfect. I quickly realized that I had severely underestimated the amount of time it would take me to prepare everything. I was in the kitchen for hours, chopping, sautéing, simmering, and Googling things like, what's the difference between piccata and piccata, and how do you make sure the lava cake oozes correctly? Things started to get worse when I realized that I had made a mistake with the timing of the dishes. The bruschetta needed to be made fresh, but it had taken me longer than expected to roast the vegetables. As a result, the chicken was ready far earlier than the other parts of the meal. I decided to go ahead and serve the bruschetta as an appetizer, even though it had started to go soggy. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't as crisp as it should have been. I then moved on to the main dish, and I thought I had it all under control, until I noticed that the chicken had started to burn on the edges. I panicked and tried to salvage it, but it just kept getting worse. By the time I finally plated the chicken piccata, it was dry, and the sauce had somehow turned into this weird, thick paste instead of the delicate, buttery consistency it was supposed to have. At this point, I had already run out of time and had no choice but to move on to dessert. Making the chocolate lava cakes was supposed to be the easiest part. I followed the recipe to the letter, but of course, something went wrong. I don't know if it was the fancy chocolate I had used or if I had measured the flour wrong, but when I tried to unmold the cakes, they collapsed in on themselves. I was left with a sad, flat pile of chocolate mush. Not exactly the molten lava cake I had envisioned. I threw them in the oven again, hoping that a second round of baking might work miracles, but all I ended up with were burnt edges and a puddle of melted chocolate that didn't resemble anything close to a lava cake. By the time my crush showed up, I was frazzled and in a full-blown panic mode. I tried to pull it together, greet her with a smile, and offer her a glass of wine. I had set the table with candles and everything, hoping that the ambience might distract her from what I knew was going to be a culinary disaster. We sat down to eat, and things started off okay. The bruschetta was edible, albeit soggy, and we chatted about work and life. But when I served the main course, I could tell she was trying to be polite, but it was obvious she wasn't impressed. She chewed slowly, looked at me with a forced smile, and said, this is really interesting. I've never had chicken quite like this before. I don't think she was trying to insult me, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. It was at that moment that I realized I had failed. The chicken tasted like cardboard, the vegetables were overcooked, and the sauce was a weird, gloopy mess. But the real kicker came when it was time for dessert. I placed the sad, burnt chocolate cake in front of her and held my breath as she took a bite. She paused, looked at me, and said, I think this might have melted a little too much. She smiled awkwardly, and I knew she was trying to be kind, but it was clear that everything had gone horribly wrong. I spent the next hour apologizing over and over, trying to salvage the evening, but it was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. We finished dinner in silence, and she politely declined a second glass of wine. When she left, I could tell she was just being nice, but I could see in her eyes that she knew the evening hadn't gone as planned. I've texted her since, but I haven't had the courage to mention the dinner disaster. I know I've made things awkward, and honestly, I'm not sure I'll ever recover from the embarrassment of that night. She hasn't been mean or anything, but I don't think I'll ever live this one down. Lesson learned, next time, maybe just take her out to a restaurant. And maybe, just maybe, stop trying to cook like a professional chef when you've only ever mastered pasta. TIFU by trying to impress my friends with a homemade fireworks show. It all started a few weeks ago when I was hanging out with my friends at a bar. We were discussing plans for the upcoming summer weekend, and someone jokingly suggested that we should have a fireworks show at my place to celebrate the good weather. We all laughed, and the conversation moved on to other topics. However, the more I thought about it, the more I loved the idea. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to impress my friends, and honestly, it sounded like a lot of fun. After all, who doesn't love fireworks? The next day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I wasn't one to settle for anything mediocre, so I started researching how to make fireworks myself. At first, I was a little intimidated by the idea of creating them, but after reading a few beginner guides and watching some YouTube tutorials, I convinced myself that it couldn't be that hard. I was a DIY guy. I had built my own furniture, fixed appliances around the house, and even dabbled in a little bit of electronics repair. How different could making fireworks be, right? I took a trip to my local hardware store, and after nervously walking around for a bit, I ended up with a shopping cart full of what I thought I would need: black powder for the explosive charge, potassium nitrate, aluminum powder, and some other chemicals that were recommended in the guides. Looking back, I should have probably stopped myself right then and there, but my brain was already so wrapped up in the idea of creating something awesome that I didn't think about the potential consequences. I was on a mission. Over the next few days, I spent all my free time researching how to properly mix these ingredients, crafting firework tubes out of PVC pipe, and setting up a small area in my backyard for the grand event. I kept it all a secret, telling my friends that I had something special planned for the weekend. They were intrigued, but I kept them guessing about what it was, wanting to build some excitement. As the day approached, I was buzzing with anticipation. I had everything prepared: a small but impressive array of homemade fireworks, a launch pad I'd built myself, and a safety zone well away from where we'd be standing to watch the show. I felt like a modern-day pyrotechnician, ready to take on the world. The weather was perfect that day, too: clear skies, no wind, and the temperature just right for an evening of outdoor fun. Everything was falling into place. When my friends arrived at my house, they were immediately intrigued by the setup in my backyard. I tried to act calm and collected, but deep down, I was feeling a bit nervous. I explained the safety measures I had put in place, including a fire extinguisher, a bucket of water, and a clear boundary for everyone to stay behind. I made it sound like I knew exactly what I was doing, even though I was just hoping it would all go smoothly. We all cracked open some beers, gathered around, and I took a deep breath. The moment had arrived. I lit the fuse on the first firework, a simple one I had made by filling a tube with a mix of chemicals and attaching it to a small wooden stake. It was supposed to shoot into the air and explode with a shower of colorful sparks. As soon as I lit the fuse, I turned to my friends with a grin, ready for them to be amazed. The fuse sputtered and hissed as it burned down, and I stood there, thinking, okay, here we go, here we go. Then, with a deafening bang, the firework exploded. But instead of a colorful burst of light, a massive cloud of smoke shot up into the air, followed by what sounded like a small car engine revving. The explosion was way too loud, way louder than anything I had expected, and the shockwave hit us like a gust of wind. The ground shook beneath our feet, and I immediately realized that something had gone horribly wrong. Before I could even process what had just happened, there was a loud crack, as the next firework I had set up ignited. I hadn't even touched the fuse, but somehow, it had lit up on its own, sending another shockwave through the yard. This one was different, though. It didn't just explode. It sent a trail of sparks across the grass, catching a patch of dry leaves on fire. In a panic, I grabbed the fire extinguisher I had set aside and began dousing the flames, but not before the fire had spread to a nearby bush. As I scrambled to put it out, I heard my friends shouting in alarm, and I realized I had completely lost control of the situation. But it didn't stop there. My fireworks kept going off in rapid succession. Every single one seemed to explode with more force than I had anticipated, and they were all unpredictable. Some shot into the air and exploded far higher than I thought they would, while others burst right where they were supposed to, but with far too much force, sending shrapnel flying. One of them, in particular, ended up hitting the side of my neighbor's shed, leaving a dent and causing some minor damage. I couldn't believe what was happening. In the chaos, one of my friends, who had been trying to get a good view of the fireworks, slipped on a patch of wet grass and fell into the pool. As if the situation weren't already bad enough, my neighbor, hearing the explosion and the noise, came rushing outside, shouting about how I had just blown up part of their property. And to top it all off, the sound of sirens grew louder in the distance. The fire department arrived in what felt like mere minutes. I could see the flashing lights from a mile away, and that was when I realized this was a total disaster. I was hoping maybe they would just shrug it off, but no. They came in full force, assessed the damage, and began asking me a bunch of questions about the fireworks. I tried to explain that I had made them as a harmless DIY project, but I could see from their expressions that they were not impressed. One of the firefighters even pointed out that the chemicals I had used were highly dangerous and could have caused a serious fire or injury. To make matters worse, my neighbor filed a small claim against me for the damage to his shed, and my friends, well, they were a mix of concerned and pissed off. The mood was officially ruined, and I could see it in their eyes that I had gone way too far trying to impress them. Everyone left early, and I was left standing in my now damaged backyard, staring at the aftermath of my poor decisions. So, here I am, writing this as a cautionary tale for anyone who might think that creating your own fireworks is a good idea. Spoiler alert, it's not. If I had just bought a few professional-grade fireworks and left it at that, none of this would have happened. Instead, I nearly set my backyard on fire, ruined a weekend of fun, damaged my neighbor's property, and earned the ire of the fire department. The moral of the story? Don't try to be a hero when it comes to fireworks. Just buy them from the store and enjoy the show, without the potential for catastrophe. Lesson learned the hard way. TIFU by accidentally sending a heartfelt confession to my crush, on the wrong email thread. So, I, 25M, have had a huge crush on a coworker, let's call her Sarah, for the past 6 months. We work in different departments but interact frequently, and over time, we've become friends. We chat during lunch, occasionally text after work, and have even gotten together a few times for after-work happy hours. I'd like to think we've built a good rapport. The thing is, I've been harboring a secret. I really like her, and it's driving me crazy. We've had some amazing conversations, and I could see us being more than just friends, if I could just find the courage to tell her. But, you know, the usual anxiety. I didn't want to jeopardize our friendship by making things awkward, so I bottled everything up inside. Classic move, right? One evening, after a couple of beers with friends, I decided it was finally time to tell her how I felt. But not in person, oh no, I'm way too awkward for that. Instead, I figured I'd do something more casual and low pressure, an email. I'd put my thoughts down, send it, and wait to see what happened. Worst case scenario, she'd ignore it, and I'd just play it cool at work and pretend like it never happened. Easy enough. So, there I was, sitting at my desk on a Thursday night, crafting this email. I had just finished a long shift and was exhausted, but I knew I had to do this. I started with a little small talk, just to keep it casual. Then, I got to the good stuff, my confession. Here's what I wrote, not an exact copy, but close enough to give you the vibe. Hey Sarah, I hope you're doing well. I've been thinking about something for a while, and I just want to say it out loud because it's been on my mind for months now. I really enjoy spending time with you, and I've realized that I've developed feelings for you. It's kind of scary to admit this, especially since we work together and I don't want to make things weird, but I felt like I needed to be honest with you. If you don't feel the same way, that's okay, I just wanted you to know. Take care, / my name, simple, right? It was honest, low pressure, and had just the right amount of vulnerability without being over the top. I hit send, and immediately felt a wave of relief. Sure, there was still the whole waiting for her response thing, but at least it was done. I'd said what I needed to say. Now, I could just relax and wait for her to read it. Fast forward to the next morning. I'm sitting in my cubicle, pretending to work, but secretly refreshing my inbox every 2 minutes to see if Sarah had replied. She hadn't, which I assumed was normal. She might be busy, or maybe she didn't get a chance to check her email yet. I was trying to be patient, but the anxiety was building. I kept wondering if I'd just ruined everything between us. What if she thought I was weird? What if she had already told people about it? Then, around noon, I finally got a notification. New email from Sarah. My heart skipped a beat. I quickly clicked open the message. But it wasn't from Sarah. It was from my boss. Let's call him Mr. Harrison. At first, I thought I might have sent the email to the wrong person by accident. But no, I recognized the subject line, Project Update. It was a thread about a project I'd been working on with a few other people, including Mr. Harrison. I opened the email, thinking maybe he was just following up on something. But then, I saw it. The email thread was full of messages. And there, buried in the middle of the thread, was my confession. Somehow, I had replied to the wrong email, one that wasn't just between me and Sarah, but an entire group of people. Mr. Harrison, Sarah, and even a few other coworkers were all on that email thread. Panic set in. How had this happened? I looked back at the email I had sent and realized I must have clicked reply all instead of just replying to Sarah's personal thread. I was mortified. Not only had I confessed my feelings for Sarah to an entire group of coworkers, but I had done it in a professional setting, during work hours, no less. My mind raced. Did Sarah see it? Did Mr. Harrison see it? Did everyone see it? My palms were sweating, and I felt like I might throw up. I frantically checked the sent folder to confirm what I had just done. Sure enough, my confession was there, sent to everyone, including Sarah, who was now likely reading it in real time. I thought about running to the nearest bathroom and crying. I wanted to disappear from the face of the earth. How could I show my face at work again? I had just exposed my deepest, most vulnerable feelings to the last group of people I wanted to know. And I'd done it all in the most unprofessional way possible. A few minutes later, I saw Sarah walking toward the break room. I immediately froze, unsure of what to do. My heart pounded in my chest. She passed by my cubicle without saying anything, and I thought, okay, maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought. Maybe she hadn't seen the email yet. Maybe she was just trying to process it. But then, she stopped, turned around, and came back to my desk. Hey, can I talk to you for a second? She asked, her voice a little shaky. My stomach dropped. This was it. This was the moment I'd been dreading. She must have seen the email, and now she was going to confront me about it. Yeah, of course, I stammered, standing up. We went to a more private area in the office, and she looked at me, her eyes wide. I just wanted to say, I saw your email. And I really appreciate you being honest with me. I had no idea you felt that way. Honestly, I'm flattered, but I think we should talk more about this. Maybe over coffee later? I could hardly believe what I was hearing. She didn't seem weirded out or angry. She seemed understanding. Relieved, even. I was still embarrassed, of course, but maybe this wasn't the disaster I had convinced myself it would be. Long story short, we did go for coffee later that afternoon, and while nothing crazy happened, we're still friends and taking it slow. Things are definitely different now. I don't know what will happen next, but I guess this is my attempt at taking a leap of faith. So yeah, TIFU by accidentally sending a confession to my crush, and a bunch of other coworkers, by replying all. It was an embarrassing mess, but it ended up not being the total disaster I expected. Lesson learned: always double-check your email recipients before you hit send. TIFU: by accidentally sabotaging my friend's wedding because I misunderstood the seating chart and got myself in the wrong place. It all started with a text message. My best friend, Amy, had been planning her wedding for over a year, and I was excited to be one of her bridesmaids. Amy and I had been close since childhood, and I was honored when she asked me to stand by her on her big day. The dress was picked out, the bridal shower was a hit, and we had all been counting down the days to the event. However, one tiny mistake was about to turn the whole day into an absolute disaster. It all began the night before the wedding. We were all gathered at the venue for the rehearsal dinner, which was casual but important. Amy's family had rented out a beautiful banquet hall, and everything was looking perfect. The tables were set up for the next day's reception, with name cards placed carefully at each seat. The seating chart was a bit complicated, so Amy and the wedding planner made sure to explain everything to us during the rehearsal. I remember walking around the hall with the seating chart in my hand, squinting at the tiny handwriting to make sure I knew where I was supposed to sit. I had been assigned a seat at table 6, which was in a corner of the room, but it was marked as the bridesmaid table, so I assumed that would be where I would be sitting during the reception as well. My friend Claire, another bridesmaid, had also been assigned to table 6, so I figured it would be just the two of us at a little table off to the side, quietly chatting during the wedding. The next day arrived, and the wedding was beautiful. Amy looked stunning in her dress, and the ceremony went off without a hitch. I couldn't wait for the reception to start, mostly because I was starving, and I was looking forward to the meal. When it was time to move into the reception hall, I followed the other bridesmaids toward the seating area, clutching my little name card in my hand. But this was where things started to go wrong. I walked into the hall, and the first thing I noticed was that the atmosphere was a lot more formal than I had expected. The lighting was dimmed, and the tables were covered with white tablecloths, crystal glasses, and candles. I spotted table 6 in the far corner and started heading in that direction, but as I got closer, I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks. The other guests sitting at the table weren't bridesmaids. They weren't even people I recognized. They looked like they might have been wealthy relatives of the bride. I quickly glanced down at my card again and checked the table number. Table 6. I was in the right place. Or so I thought. I awkwardly stood there for a moment, not sure what to do. A tall, elderly woman with a rather impressive-looking silver necklace raised an eyebrow at me as I lingered by the table. I was about to ask if this was table 6 when Claire came rushing over, looking flustered. "What are you doing?" she whispered, clearly trying not to draw attention to us. "I'm supposed to sit here," I said, showing her my name card. Claire looked at it and then at the table, clearly confused. "This isn't your seat," she said, but her voice was too soft for anyone around us to hear. "I'm at table 6, I insisted, now getting nervous. "It's on the seating chart. It's where Amy said we would sit." "No," she said, grabbing my arm and pulling me away from the table. "Table 6 is for the bride's family. You're supposed to sit with the bridesmaids. Come with me." I could feel my cheeks turning red as I followed Claire to a different part of the room. She pulled me toward a smaller table near the back where a few other bridesmaids were sitting. They all looked at me with raised eyebrows as I took a seat. "Okay, what just happened?" one of the other bridesmaids, Jess, asked. I don't know," I said, still feeling confused and embarrassed. The seating chart said I was at table 6, and it seemed fine, but it wasn't the right table. Claire shook her head and explained what had really happened. Apparently, the wedding planner had made a mistake when assigning seating for the bridesmaids and had accidentally put us at the wrong table on the chart. Table 6 was meant for the bride's extended family, but I had mistakenly thought it was for the bridesmaids because of the way it was labeled. When I walked in and tried to sit there, I had inadvertently joined Amy's aunt, uncle, and cousins, who had no idea who I was. But here's where things really took a turn for the worse. As the night went on, I kept feeling the awkward stares from the extended family at table 6. They were polite enough, but I could tell they weren't sure what to make of me. Things started to get uncomfortable when Amy's aunt, who I learned was quite a character, decided to make a scene. She was a bit tipsy from the wine and kept mentioning that I was sitting at the wrong table in a loud voice, clearly trying to make sure everyone around us knew about my seating error. The entire table turned toward me, and I could feel the heat rising in my face as I tried to explain the mix-up. "It's just a mistake," I said, trying to laugh it off. "I thought this was the bridesmaid table." "Ha! No, dear. This is my table," Amy's aunt said, pointing to the card on the table that read Amy's extended family. The tone was cutting, and I felt like I was shrinking into my seat. But that wasn't the worst of it. After dinner, there was dancing, and I was still trying to salvage what remained of my dignity. I made my way to the dance floor and bumped into one of the groomsmen, Mark. He looked at me, clearly recognizing that something was off. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yeah, I just sat at the wrong table," I explained sheepishly. "Oh, I noticed," Mark said. The whole room did. Amy's aunt didn't stop talking about it for like 10 minutes. That was when I realized just how badly I had messed up. I had inadvertently caused a scene by sitting at the wrong table, and Amy's aunt had made sure everyone knew about it. To make matters worse, the whole family seemed to have taken notice of my blunder, and I could tell they were gossiping about me behind my back. Every time I passed by one of them, I felt their eyes on me like I was a walking disaster. By the end of the night, I was ready to crawl into a hole and never come out. I apologized to Amy later, but she just laughed it off, which was nice of her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had completely ruined the evening. I had thought I was being helpful by following the seating chart, but in reality, I had made a social faux pas that I'd never lived down. Amy reassured me that it was all fine, but the incident was already the talk of the wedding. So, yeah. That's how I accidentally sabotaged my best friend's wedding by sitting at the wrong table and becoming the topic of conversation for the rest of the night. It was the most awkward experience of my life, and I'll never look at a seating chart the same way again. TLDR, thought I was supposed to sit at table 6 during my best friend's wedding, but accidentally sat at the bride's extended family table, causing an awkward scene and becoming the topic of gossip for the entire night. I ruined the wedding. Hey, friends! If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. So, this happened a few days ago, and it's one of those things where I keep replaying it in my head and cringing harder each time. I'm still not sure whether I should be laughing or crying. It all started with a simple plan to surprise my girlfriend with a weekend getaway to a nearby vineyard. We've been dating for about a year now, and things have been great. The relationship's been smooth, but sometimes you want to spice things up a little. I decided that I would plan a nice surprise weekend for her, something out of the ordinary. After a lot of research, I found a beautiful vineyard about 2 hours away from where we live. It was this quaint, charming place that had been getting amazing reviews. They offered wine tastings, a lovely dinner, and even cozy little cottages where you could stay the night. Perfect, right? I'm the kind of person who loves surprises, but I'm also a little bit of a control freak, so I didn't want her to have any clue about what was going on. I kept dropping hints, pretending I didn't have any plans, acting like I had no clue where we were going for the weekend, all while secretly getting everything ready. I thought I was being clever, but I should have known that keeping everything a secret from her would eventually come back to bite me. The day of the trip, I was a little nervous. I had already packed our bags and prepped everything, I literally spent hours online looking for the perfect place to stop for lunch along the way, scouting out restaurants, checking reviews, and making sure it was a place that would look nice for a quick stop on the way to the vineyard. This was supposed to be a relaxing, picturesque weekend, and I didn't want any surprises. Well, the biggest surprise came in the form of me being an absolute idiot. The first clue that things weren't going to go as planned happened as soon as we got in the car. I had a playlist ready, with all of her favorite songs and some romantic tunes that I thought would set the mood for the drive. I could tell she was excited, but when she asked where we were going, I stuck to the no clue act. She was confused but played along. That was when I accidentally made the first mistake of the weekend. We were cruising down the highway, and I was casually chatting with her, talking about how cool the vineyard was and how we were going to have the best time. I mentioned something about the amazing food they served there, and suddenly her eyes lit up, and she said, "Wait, are we going to that vineyard?" I froze. I had totally forgotten that, a few weeks earlier, I had mentioned this exact vineyard to her when we were talking about places we wanted to visit in the future. She had shown interest in it, but I didn't think she remembered the name. I had literally just blown the surprise. To make matters worse, she immediately started guessing everything about the trip, trying to figure out what was going to happen next. The illusion of surprise was already gone, and I could see her excitement start to fade as she realized I'd made this little blunder. At that point, I panicked. I told her that she was wrong and that we were just going to have lunch at some fancy restaurant before heading to a totally different place. I was so embarrassed, but she seemed to buy it. We got to the lunch stop, a beautiful little farm-to-table bistro I'd researched. We sat down to eat, and I was trying my best to salvage the trip. Everything was fine until, of course, the waiter came over. This is when I realized that I had made a rookie mistake. The waiter, in all of his wisdom, asked, "So, are you two here to celebrate anything special today?" I froze. My girlfriend looked at me with a little smile, and without missing a beat, I blurted out, "Yes, we're here celebrating our anniversary." Now, I know what you're thinking, our anniversary was months ago, so why would I claim that? I panicked. In my head, I was thinking, if I don't say something quickly, she'll realize I've completely forgotten the anniversary. My girlfriend stared at me for a second, and then just nodded, playing along as best as she could. But I could tell she was confused. After lunch, we were back in the car, and she wasn't talking as much. I tried to salvage the mood by talking about how much I loved her, how much I was looking forward to the vineyard, but it was clear I'd messed things up. As we pulled up to the vineyard, I could see her trying to cheer up. She was giving me half-hearted smiles, but I could tell that the surprise wasn't what I had envisioned. It felt like I had broken some unspoken rule in relationships, like I'd somehow invalidated the whole experience by not being more mindful of her feelings. We checked in and were given our keys for a cozy little cabin on the vineyard grounds. The place was beautiful, no doubt about it. The atmosphere was peaceful, the kind of place where you could get lost in the views and enjoy nature. We unpacked and went for a walk around the vineyard. I could feel the tension lifting between us as the surroundings did their best to calm the mood. But then, I made the mistake of trying to make up for everything. I thought the best way to make things right was by getting really romantic. So, after a long walk, I decided to take her to a small picnic area I had seen earlier, overlooking the hills. I had packed wine, cheese, and fruit, hoping to set the perfect romantic scene. Everything was going well until I tried to pour the wine. I had never been much of a wine guy, but I figured I could manage. What I didn't anticipate was that I would be terrible at pouring wine. First, I spilled some on her dress. Then, I managed to knock over the bottle, and the entire contents spilled onto the grass. I had ruined the romantic moment in the most spectacular way possible. She looked at me with disbelief, but somehow, she laughed. I didn't know if she was laughing because she thought it was funny or because she was trying to hold it together, but I felt like the entire trip had turned into a disaster. Later that evening, when we were back in our little cabin, I tried to make it up to her again. I set up a little surprise candlelit dinner in the cabin and had planned to give her a gift. I had even bought a necklace that I thought she'd love. But then I accidentally knocked over the candle, starting a small flame that I had to frantically put out with a towel. At this point, she started laughing harder, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I should have joined in or apologized. We ended up not having the romantic evening I'd imagined at all. But, surprisingly, she told me that despite everything going wrong, it had still been one of the most memorable trips we'd ever had. In the end, the weekend was a series of unfortunate events, but it taught me a valuable lesson. When planning something special, it's okay to mess up as long as you're with the right person who appreciates the effort, even if it's not perfect. I learned that sometimes, the best moments are the ones that aren't planned and the ones you can laugh about afterward. It wasn't the romantic, flawless getaway I'd envisioned, but it definitely turned into a trip we'd both never forget. Even if it was because I was a complete mess the entire time. TIFU by trying to impress my date with a fancy home-cooked meal and ending up in the ER. So, I, 29M, had been chatting with a girl, 27F, on a dating app for a few weeks, and things were going well. We had lots in common, and the chemistry was undeniable through messages. After a couple of dates at restaurants, I figured it was time to take the next step and invite her over for dinner at my place. I wanted to impress her, so I decided to make a fancy, homemade meal. Not just any meal, but something that would show her I could cook and put some thought into it. Plus, it was a way to give off that I'm sophisticated and charming vibe without having to rely on restaurant food. Now, here's where I should have paid attention to a few red flags. For one, I'm not exactly a master chef. Sure, I can cook basic things like pasta or scrambled eggs, but anything beyond that usually involves a lot of Googling and hoping for the best. But, despite this, I decided I was going to prepare something more complex, beef Wellington. You know, the kind of dish Gordon Ramsay cooks on TV and makes look effortless? Yeah, that's the one. I spent the entire day before the dinner prepping everything. I went to the grocery store and bought the most expensive cuts of beef I could afford, along with all the fancy ingredients like mushrooms, puff pastry, and foie gras. I was feeling pretty confident at this point. How hard could it be? It was just assembling things, right? Wrong. I started cooking in the afternoon, giving myself plenty of time to make sure everything was perfect. By the time my date, Sarah, was about to arrive, I had spent hours in the kitchen. The first mistake I made was underestimating how long the beef would take to cook. I thought I had it all figured out, but I didn't realize just how long the meat needed to rest before wrapping it in pastry. Then, the pastry wouldn't cooperate. It kept tearing, which made me panic because I knew it had to look pristine to impress her. At this point, I was about an hour behind schedule, and the kitchen was a mess. To top it off, I realized I hadn't set the table, and the wine I was supposed to pair with the meal was still sitting in the fridge, unopened. So, naturally, I started to rush. Sarah texted me saying she was on her way, and I had to make a split-second decision. I could either take a breath and accept that things weren't going to be perfect, or I could push through and risk completely ruining the meal. I chose the latter, thinking I could salvage it. I finally managed to get the beef Wellington into the oven after nearly losing all hope. When she arrived, I greeted her at the door, trying to look cool and calm, but I was internally panicking. She looked beautiful as expected, and I could tell she was excited. She complimented me on the ambience of my place, which I quickly took as an opportunity to divert attention from my chaotic kitchen. I offered her a glass of wine, but my attempts to open the bottle were not going well. I forgot how to use a corkscrew and ended up just stabbing the cork with it, which sent cork pieces flying. At this point, I'm sure she was starting to question her life choices. But she smiled through it, and I tried to brush it off as part of my quirky charm. We sat down in the living room to chat while the Wellington baked, and she was gracious enough to ask about my cooking skills. I laughed it off and told her this was my big moment to shine, which she seemed to appreciate. In the back of my mind, though, I was stressing over the fact that I wasn't even sure if the beef was cooked all the way through. Finally, after what felt like a year, I told her the dinner was ready. I led her to the dining table, and I presented the beef Wellington with as much flair as I could muster. But when I cut into it, I immediately realized something was terribly wrong. The beef was raw. Not just a little undercooked, completely raw, like bloody and cold in the middle raw. The puff pastry wasn't even golden, it was soggy and limp. To make matters worse, the mushrooms I had wrapped around the beef were slimy and didn't do anything to improve the flavor. For a second, I just stared at it. She looked at me, then at the disaster of a meal. "So, is this supposed to be like this?" she asked, her voice dripping with kindness but clearly trying to mask her confusion. At that point, I could feel myself sweating. I tried to save face and laughed awkwardly, saying something like, "Oh, it's a new recipe. It's supposed to be a little unconventional." But the more I spoke, the more I could feel my dignity slipping away. She smiled, probably out of politeness, and suggested we just eat something else. I appreciated that, but I wasn't going to let this evening be a complete disaster. I didn't want to order takeout like a coward. No, I was going to fix this right now. I told her to give me a minute, and I rushed back to the kitchen. The idea was simple. I would throw the whole thing back in the oven and hope for the best. As I was about to do that, I accidentally knocked over the pan of mushrooms, which then scattered all over the oven floor. In a panic, I tried to get them out with a pair of tongs, but that only made things worse. The oven started to smoke, and I could hear the fire alarm starting to go off. Sarah walked into the kitchen, a look of horror on her face as smoke billowed from the oven, and she gently told me that maybe we should just order some pizza. At this point, I had completely lost all sense of self-preservation. I just threw my hands up and admitted defeat. "Okay, you're right. This is a disaster. I can't even make a simple dinner." She gave me a sympathetic look, and honestly, I was expecting her to leave right then and there. But she didn't. Instead, she suggested we grab that pizza together and then maybe watch a movie. I couldn't believe she was still willing to hang out after everything that had happened. We ordered a pizza, sat on the couch, and spent the rest of the evening talking and laughing about the ridiculousness of the whole situation. Turns out, the conversation and her company were much better than the meal I had spent hours stressing over. By the end of the night, I was feeling more comfortable with her than I had after weeks of texting. And while the evening didn't go the way I had planned, I think I learned a valuable lesson. Don't try to impress someone with a meal that's way out of your skill level. And, more importantly, don't underestimate the power of pizza when things go wrong. We ended up going on a second date a week later, this time to a restaurant, and it went much smoother. I made sure to keep it simple. But I still think about that night and laugh, and honestly, it's one of the best, and most embarrassing, dates I've ever had. So, yeah, TIFU by trying to impress my date with beef Wellington. Instead, I ended up impressing her with my ability to ruin food and cause chaos in my own kitchen. So, let me start by saying that I'm generally not the kind of guy who cooks much. I'm a takeout kind of guy, maybe a little microwave meal here and there. But my girlfriend, let's call her Sarah, has been encouraging me to cook more because she loves cooking, and we both thought it'd be nice to spend some time together in the kitchen. Plus, I wanted to do something special for her, because she's always doing sweet things for me. So, I decided to surprise her with a homemade dinner. I thought this would be a simple, romantic gesture. I've watched enough cooking shows on TV to know the basics, and she'd been talking about how much she loves pasta, so I figured I'd make her a fancy Italian dinner. You know, nothing too complicated, a classic spaghetti with marinara sauce. I went all in. I went to the store, got all the ingredients, and even bought a nice bottle of wine. I felt like I was really going to knock this out of the park. I got home, set everything up, and immediately started prepping. First, I turned on the stove, filled a pot with water for the spaghetti, and put it on to boil. As I was chopping some garlic for the sauce, I was feeling pretty confident. Maybe a little too confident. I mean, how hard could it be, right? Pasta and sauce, that's basically it. I could do this. The water in the pot started to boil, so I threw the pasta in. Then, I moved on to the sauce. I was making everything from scratch, no Jared marinara for me. I had my tomatoes, garlic, onions, some herbs. I was going to make this sauce like an Italian grandma would. It was going great. I threw the garlic in some olive oil, and it was sizzling away like I was a pro. But, and this is where I should have slowed down, I got a little distracted. I heard the water boiling over in the pot. I turned my attention to the pot, grabbed a spoon to stir the pasta, and managed to spill boiling water onto the stove. No big deal. I cleaned it up quickly, but as I did, I noticed that I had accidentally left a dish towel too close to the burner. It was on fire. At first, it was a small flame. I tried to flick it away, but the towel was now fully engulfed in fire. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I grabbed the towel, which only made it worse. I ran to the sink to douse it in water, but as soon as I turned on the faucet, the towel was even worse. Now there were flames on my arm and the sink was a mess of hot water and smoke. I had a choice: either I could try to keep putting out the fire with the towel, which I wasn't confident would work, or I could focus on the stove and hope to save the dinner. I decided I would focus on the stove. Big mistake. While I was trying to put out the flames in the sink, the pasta started to burn in the pot. The sauce, which I thought was simmering nicely, had started to turn into some burnt sludge at the bottom of the pan. I couldn't even smell the tomatoes anymore, just burnt oil and regret. In the background, I could hear the faint sound of the smoke alarm, which I had completely ignored up until that point. At this point, I was in full panic mode. The fire on the towel was still burning in the sink, the pasta was stuck to the bottom of the pot, and I realized that there was no way I could save this dinner. I just needed to get the fire out before things escalated. I grabbed a pot of water and splashed it on the fire. That worked, but now there was water everywhere. The kitchen was flooded, and I was drenched in sweat, water, and guilt. Meanwhile, the smoke alarm was blaring, and I still had a burnt mess in front of me. By this point, I could hear Sarah coming in the front door. She had been at work and was expecting this romantic dinner, and all she was going to find was a disaster. She walked into the kitchen, saw the smoke, the soggy towels, the burnt pasta, and immediately looked at me with a mixture of concern and horror. I tried to salvage the situation, but there was no saving it. I looked at her and said, "I'm so sorry. I tried to cook for you, but, I think I need to take a cooking class or something." She stood there for a second, not sure whether to laugh or cry, but then she just started laughing. It was kind of an awkward laugh, but I appreciated it. She went into damage control mode, grabbing the fire extinguisher I didn't even know we had and making sure the stove was off. At this point, there was no saving the kitchen. It smelled like smoke, there were burned things everywhere, and the pasta was inedible. Honestly, it felt like a scene out of a bad sitcom. I felt terrible. I had tried so hard to impress her, and instead, I'd caused chaos in the kitchen, ruined dinner, and almost set our apartment on fire. She tried to comfort me, saying it wasn't a big deal, but I could tell she was disappointed. Not because of the burnt food, but because I'd gotten so worked up trying to make everything perfect, and I had let the stress take over. She told me it was okay, and we ended up ordering pizza instead. The irony of it all? She said she loved pizza more than pasta anyway, so at least I got that part right. But still, I think I've learned my lesson. I'll stick to what I know best, ordering in. If I'm going to impress anyone with my cooking skills, I might need a little more practice, and maybe some fire safety lessons too. It's safe to say that I won't be cooking again for a while. TIFU, by getting so caught up in my own plans that I completely forgot about my wife's birthday. It all started like any other year. We've been married for 5 years now, and while we both try to keep things fresh, I can't deny that I've been a bit of a procrastinator when it comes to planning surprises for her. I usually come up with something last minute, and it's become a running joke between us. But this year? I was determined to do better. A few weeks before her birthday, I had this brilliant idea: I would surprise her with a weekend getaway. Not just any weekend getaway, though. I was going to book a cabin in the mountains, a place so isolated that we could just focus on each other, no distractions, no work emails, no social media. Just us. It was going to be romantic, cozy, and absolutely perfect. I even made sure the cabin was pet-friendly because I didn't want to leave our dog behind. I thought I was nailing it. I researched the best spots, found a hidden gem that looked like something straight out of a Hallmark movie, and reserved it well in advance. For once, I was actually ahead of the game. I even planned out the entire trip down to the smallest details. I was going to take her hiking, bring her favorite wine, cook a fancy dinner in front of a roaring fire, and of course, make sure I had the best gifts ready for her. I was ready to be the best husband ever. Then life happened. The week before her birthday, things at work got intense. I work in a high-stress job with tight deadlines, and this particular week, my boss assigned me a project that was going to take up every waking minute of my time. I thought I could balance both. I thought I could work late and still have enough time to give my wife the birthday weekend she deserved. But the more I tried to juggle work and my plans, the more everything started slipping through my fingers. On the day of her birthday, I was still stuck in the office. I had only a couple of hours to get everything together. At that point, I hadn't packed our bags, hadn't arranged for anyone to take care of the dog, and, worst of all, hadn't even gotten her a gift. All my grand ideas of giving her the perfect birthday weekend crumbled, and I was left scrambling to figure out how to salvage the situation. I had a full-blown panic attack in my office, staring at the clock as the minutes ticked away. My wife was going to be home any minute, and I hadn't even planned dinner. I called her briefly during the day, trying to act like everything was normal. I told her I had a surprise planned and that I needed her to be patient. She sounded excited, which only made me feel worse. I had already let her down without even realizing it. When I finally got home, I rushed to get things in order. I grabbed her present, which was an expensive bottle of perfume that I had ordered online 2 days ago but hadn't even wrapped. It was still in the box it came in. I shoved it into a gift bag, along with a card I quickly scribbled a message on. I wasn't proud of it, but I had to pretend I had everything under control. When she walked through the door, she immediately saw the panic in my eyes. But I tried to hide it, putting on my best surprise face. I hugged her, kissed her, and gave her the gift. She smiled politely, but I could tell she wasn't impressed. "What's this? Is this the surprise?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. She was clearly trying to mask her disappointment. I explained that we were going away for the weekend, but she seemed skeptical. She asked if I had packed, if I'd arranged for the dog, and if everything was ready. I had to admit that I hadn't. I was completely unprepared, and it was obvious to both of us that this surprise was quickly turning into a disaster. Still, I hoped she'd understand. She didn't. "I thought we were going to spend time together. You didn't even bother to make it special." "It's just another weekend," she said quietly, hurt in her voice. At that moment, I realized how wrong I had been. I had focused so much on the big plan, the weekend away, the cabin, the perfect getaway, that I had lost sight of what was truly important, her. I had made her birthday about everything but her. I thought I could just buy a fancy trip, give her an expensive gift, and check all the boxes of what I thought would make it perfect. I didn't consider that she might just want me to be present, to be thoughtful in a way that went beyond grand gestures. She went to bed early that night, and I sat on the couch, drowning in guilt. I had messed up, big time. In trying to create the perfect surprise, I had only succeeded in disappointing her. The next morning, I woke up and decided to try and make things right, even though I knew I couldn't undo the damage. I canceled the weekend trip. It wasn't the place we were going that mattered, it was the time we spent together. I decided to cook her a homemade breakfast, something she'd always loved. I also spent the day planning a surprise date night, this time doing it the way I should have from the beginning, no grand gestures, just the two of us and some quality time. I also took a few minutes to sit down and apologize properly. I told her that I'd been so focused on the big things that I neglected the little things, like her feelings, and that I was sorry for making her feel less important. She listened, and to my relief, she forgave me. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. That day, we ended up going for a long walk, just talking and laughing. We didn't need the expensive trip, the cabin, or the extravagant plans. We needed each other, and that's what I had completely forgotten. As we sat down for a quiet dinner later, I realized something important. The best way to show someone you care is not by throwing money at them or trying to outdo yourself. It's by being present, being thoughtful, and showing up when it matters most. So, yeah. I royally messed up. I let my obsession with creating the perfect birthday overshadow the real meaning of the occasion. But I've learned my lesson, and I plan on never forgetting what really matters again. So, yesterday, I made the mistake of thinking I could impress my girlfriend with a home-cooked meal. Now, I'm no chef, but I can follow a recipe if I really try. And what better way to show off my non-existent culinary skills than to cook something extravagant, right? I had been getting really into cooking lately, watching food channels, reading blogs, and so on. I thought, hey, I can totally handle this. It'll be great. Well, let me tell you, it was not. It all started when I decided to cook a 3-course meal for my girlfriend, Sophie. It was a surprise for our anniversary, and I thought, this will knock her socks off. I'll show her how thoughtful and romantic I am. I had grand plans, an appetizer, a main course, and a dessert. Simple, right? Wrong. First, I had to decide on what to cook. Sophie isn't picky, but I know she loves seafood, so I thought a fancy shrimp pasta would be a good choice. I looked up a few recipes and found a pretty nice one, something about garlic butter shrimp with linguine. Seemed easy enough, right? I made my shopping list and rushed to the store. As I walked through the aisles, I realized how little I actually knew about what I was doing. I mean, I know how to boil pasta and thaw shrimp, but beyond that, I had no clue. I ended up grabbing random items: garlic, butter, cream, lemon, shrimp, of course, some herbs, and random spices I thought would sound impressive. I also picked up a bottle of wine, because, hey, why not? I was going all in on this romantic thing. When I got back home, I started unpacking the groceries. The kitchen was a mess almost immediately. I couldn't find some of the equipment I needed, and what I did find was mostly dirty from previous meals. I was already starting to panic, but I took a deep breath and told myself it was fine. This was gonna be great. I had a plan. I started with the appetizer, bruschetta. Another easy recipe I found online. I got the tomatoes, basil, garlic, and a baguette. The recipe said to toast the baguette slices, rub them with garlic, then top them with the tomato mixture. That sounded simple enough. I didn't realize, however, that toasting the bread would take more time than I expected. I set the oven at the wrong temperature at first, and before I knew it, the bread was charred on the edges. Not to worry though, I'd just scrape off the burnt bits and serve it anyway. No big deal, right? As I was assembling the bruschetta, I noticed the garlic I had been chopping earlier had somehow gotten into my eyes, and now I was tearing up uncontrollably. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, only to realize I had garlic oil on my face. I rubbed my eyes even more. Bad idea. It burned. Now my eyes were stinging, I smelled like garlic, and I couldn't focus. I had no choice but to take a moment to rinse my face off, which made me lose precious time. Sophie would be here soon. I finished the bruschetta, but it wasn't exactly picture perfect. The bread was a little uneven, and the topping looked messy. But hey, it was homemade. I placed the dish on the counter and moved on to the next step, the shrimp pasta. I followed the recipe as best I could, throwing in garlic and butter, but when I added the shrimp, they started splattering everywhere, hot oil flying out of the pan. I burned my hand. It was a little painful, but I soldiered through. I went to toss the shrimp with the pasta, but then I noticed the linguine had clumped together. It looked like a noodle monster. I tried to pull the strands apart with a fork, but they just stuck together like a sticky web of pasta glue. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to add the pasta water or something, but I panicked and just threw the noodles into the pan anyway, hoping for the best. At this point, I was sweating bullets. Sophie would be arriving soon, and I hadn't even started the dessert. I decided to make a simple chocolate mousse for dessert, another recipe I found online. It seemed easy enough, just chocolate, cream, and some eggs. But as I whipped the cream, I realized that I didn't have an electric mixer. My arm started aching from whisking manually. I had to take breaks every few minutes, and by the time I finally got the cream to the right consistency, it was almost time for Sophie to arrive. I poured the mousse into bowls, but it looked more like a weird, chunky pudding. The clock was ticking. I hurriedly grabbed the shrimp pasta off the stove, which looked, well, not great. The shrimp were overcooked, and the noodles were all clumped together. There was no creamy sauce. Just a dry, garlic-infused mess. But I wasn't going to give up. I plated everything, trying to make it look as fancy as possible. The bruschetta looked slightly better now that the burnt parts were scraped off, and I put the mousse in the fridge for the time being. Sophie arrived right on time, and I greeted her at the door, trying to act cool, despite the fact I was feeling like a total mess. She smiled and gave me a hug, and I led her to the dining table, where the meal was all set. She complimented me on the setup, and I felt a wave of relief. Maybe, just maybe, I had pulled it off. We sat down, and I served the bruschetta. She took a bite, and I waited for her reaction. Sophie looked up, chewing slowly. She smiled and said, "It's good, but a little burnt?" I nodded sheepishly. She didn't seem to mind too much, though, so I moved on to the shrimp pasta. She took a bite. Then another. And then she stopped. I watched as she chewed, trying to hide her expression. Finally, she said, "It's definitely different. The shrimp are kind of chewy." She swallowed, then pushed her plate aside. Are you sure you followed the recipe?" I nodded, my face red with embarrassment. Yeah. Totally. The shrimp might be a little overcooked, but the pasta's good, right?" She didn't say anything. She just smiled awkwardly and reached for her glass of wine. Finally, we moved on to the mousse. I had to admit, it didn't look great. But it was chocolate, so how bad could it be? Sophie took a spoonful and immediately made a face. I think this might be too sweet." I felt like I was sinking into the floor. My attempt at impressing her was falling apart faster than I could keep up with. She tried to be polite, but it was obvious that she wasn't enjoying any part of the meal. I was mortified. To make matters worse, as we were finishing the meal, I accidentally knocked the wine bottle off the table, spilling it all over her lap. She jumped up, completely soaked. I apologized profusely, but I was so embarrassed I could hardly look her in the eye. In the end, she took it all in stride. She laughed it off, told me it was the thought that counted, and even offered to help me clean up. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just made a complete fool of myself. TLDR, tried to cook a 3-course anniversary dinner for my girlfriend, but burned the appetizer, ruined the main course, and made an awful dessert. Also spilled wine all over her lap. Total disaster. TIFU by sending a text to my mom that was meant for my girlfriend, and it somehow turned into a multi-day disaster. It all started one Friday afternoon. I was sitting at home, having just finished a long week at work, when I got a message from my girlfriend, Sarah. We had been together for about a year, and things were going great. Sarah was sweet, supportive, and I had started to think about taking our relationship to the next level. But there was one thing that had been bothering me. Sarah had this habit of texting me in a way that always kept me guessing. She was the type to send cute, flirty messages, sometimes with a bit of sarcasm, and I'd try to keep up with witty responses. On this particular day, she sent me a text that read, "I'm going to need you to be extra sweet tonight. You know how I like it," winky face. It was a harmless, playful message, but I knew exactly what she was referring to. Sarah had this thing for romantic gestures, flowers, thoughtful surprises, and especially sweet messages. Now, I'll admit, I wasn't the best at expressing myself like that. But I wanted to impress her, so I decided to go all in and send her a message that would definitely melt her heart. I sat there for a moment, thinking about the perfect response. Finally, I came up with something that I thought would hit the mark. You know I'm always sweet for you, babe. I'm already planning something special for us tonight, winky face. It was cheesy, sure, but I was confident it would land well. I tapped the message, and without looking at the screen properly, I hit send. Immediately, I realized that I had made a terrible mistake. Instead of sending the message to Sarah, I had accidentally sent it to my mom. I froze. My heart started racing. I looked at the screen and saw my mom's name right at the top of the chat. There it was, in all its cringeworthy glory. You know I'm always sweet for you, babe. I'm already planning something special for us tonight, winky face. It took a solid 5 seconds for the realization to fully hit me. My mind was screaming, but my fingers didn't know what to do. Should I apologize? Should I pretend it was a mistake? Should I immediately call her and explain? My hands were shaking as I fumbled to delete the message, but by the time I got my bearings, it was too late. My mom had already replied. Oh, you're planning something special for me tonight? I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of thing. I nearly died on the spot. What had I done? The implications of the message were now as uncomfortable as possible. I didn't know how to respond. I couldn't even process what had just happened. I tried to play it off and act cool, so I typed back, "Oh. Mom, no, sorry. That was meant for Sarah." I guess I got my wires crossed. I held my breath, hoping she would let it go. But nope. Mom replied almost immediately, "Well, that's good, because I wasn't sure what to think. But hey, if you're planning something sweet for Sarah, I'll be expecting some of that sweetness too, right?" I wanted to curl up and die. I had no idea how to get out of this. How did I go from sending a cute text to my girlfriend to discussing sweetness with my mom? Was there any way to salvage this? The only thing I could do was text Sarah and explain the whole debacle. I quickly typed to Sarah, "You won't believe what just happened. I sent a text meant for you to my mom, and now she's pretending I was planning something romantic for her. It's honestly so awkward." To my surprise, Sarah found it hilarious. "Oh my God, that's amazing. I would have loved to be a fly on the wall for that conversation. But hey, at least you're on my good side for trying to be sweet." I laughed awkwardly, relieved that Sarah wasn't mad at me. But the situation was far from over. My mom was clearly not going to let this go easily. The next day, as I was walking around town with Sarah, my phone buzzed. I looked down and saw a new message from my mom. "So, I'm glad we cleared up the mix-up, but now I'm really curious about how you're going to make it up to me. You still owe me some of that sweetness, you know? Maybe I'll let you bake me cookies to make up for the confusion." That seems like a good start. I couldn't believe it. My mom was joking about baking cookies, but the fact that she even brought up the whole sweetness thing was just too much. I typed back, "Haha, no worries, I'll get the cookies to you soon enough. But seriously, I think we're good now, right? No more awkward texts?" Mom replied with a smiley face, "We'll see. And maybe next time, be more careful about who you're texting, huh?" I couldn't believe I was having this conversation. At least she wasn't going to hold it over my head forever. Or so I thought. The next morning, my phone buzzed again, but this time, it was a message from my aunt. "So, I heard you sent your mom a message meant for Sarah yesterday. What's that all about? Does Sarah know? Do we need to have a family chat about this?" I was mortified. How did my aunt find out about this? I had no idea how my mom had managed to turn this into a family matter, but there it was, out in the open. The whole family was apparently in on my embarrassing slip-up now. I tried to joke it off with a reply, "I'll make sure to double-check who I'm texting next time." And no, Sarah knows, it was all a mix-up. Aunt responded, "Well, at least you're still breathing." But, honestly, you should probably avoid anything even remotely sweet for a while. We're all just waiting to hear what you're planning next. Haha. I felt like I was losing control of the situation. Every time I tried to escape it, someone else would bring it up. It became a running joke in my family, and while it was funny at first, it was starting to drive me nuts. I couldn't go anywhere without someone cracking a joke about my sweetness fiasco. A week later, I thought it had finally died down. But then, on my birthday, my mom handed me a box with a bow on it. I opened it up to find a bag of cookies and a card that read, "For the sweetest son ever." I'm still waiting on those romantic surprises, though. Love, Mom. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. I had no idea how my life had turned into this bizarre sitcom episode, but at least I had learned one valuable lesson: always double-check who you're texting, especially when your family has a sense of humor. And to my surprise, Sarah still found the whole thing hilarious. But for the record, I will never text my mom and tell her I'm planning something special again. TIFU by accidentally sabotaging my best friend's wedding, and I'm still not sure if she's going to forgive me. So, to set the stage, my best friend, Emma, and I have known each other since we were 5. We've been through everything together: grades, first loves, breakups, fights, and now, she was getting married to this amazing guy, Jack. They'd been together for 4 years, and I was honored when she asked me to be her maid of honor. It was a huge deal for me. I was going to stand next to her on the most important day of her life. The wedding was set to take place in a beautiful, remote vineyard upstate. The venue was stunning, nestled on a hillside with sweeping views of the countryside. I knew Emma had put a lot of work into the details, and as her maid of honor, I had a lot of responsibilities, like organizing the bridal shower, the bachelorette party, and of course, making sure everything went smoothly on the day of. I should have known that something was bound to go wrong. I'm not exactly the most graceful person in the world, my friends jokingly call me disaster-prone. But I had convinced myself that everything would be fine. I had been through the wedding planning process with Emma. I knew the schedule, the timeline, the people, and most importantly, I knew how important this day was to her. But, you see, the problem started the night before the wedding. The bridal party was staying in a large house near the vineyard, and we had all planned to have a relaxing, low-key evening. There was a casual dinner, followed by some drinks and dancing. Nothing crazy. But I may have gotten a little too excited about the drinks. There were wine tastings, followed by a few too many glasses of champagne. I was feeling good, maybe a little too good. And that's when I made the decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. You see, Emma's dress was this gorgeous, vintage lace gown. It was beautiful, so intricate, so delicate. She had been talking about it for months, making sure it was absolutely perfect for the big day. As her maid of honor, I was in charge of helping her get into her dress on the morning of the wedding. I knew how important it was to her, and I wanted to make sure everything went smoothly. But, in my tipsy, overconfident state, I thought it would be a good idea to help her preview the dress. You know, like, let's see if we could get it on a day early just to ensure everything was going to fit perfectly. I mean, who wouldn't want to see their dress the night before, right? I went into her room, where her dress was hanging carefully on the door, and I decided to try it on myself. Yes, I know, I can already hear the collective groans from everyone reading this. But at the time, I just thought it would be fun and innocent, like a little preview of how great the wedding would be. So, I took the dress down, slipped into it, and admired myself in the mirror for a few minutes. It was stunning. But, in my slightly drunken state, I didn't think about the fact that the dress was not meant for me, and it was a little more delicate than I gave it credit for. After a few minutes of me posing in the mirror and pretending to be the bride, I decided to take the dress off. And that's when it happened. The lace got caught on the door handle as I was pulling it off, and I heard a loud tearing sound. My heart dropped. I turned around, and sure enough, there was a giant tear in the fabric, right down the side of the dress. It wasn't just a small rip, it was a full-on tear, completely visible. The kind of damage that no amount of fabric glue would fix. I panicked. I immediately grabbed my phone and texted Emma, asking her to come to my room. She was downstairs, so I had a few moments to attempt damage control. I tried to smooth the fabric over, but there was no hiding it. My fingers were trembling, and my mind was racing. How the hell was I going to fix this? Emma arrived a few minutes later, and when she saw the dress, her face went pale. I'll never forget the look of shock and disbelief in her eyes. She immediately asked, "What happened? What did you do?" I tried it on, I admitted, my voice shaking. And it got caught on the door handle, and now there's a tear. She stared at me, not saying a word. Then she said the one sentence I will never forget, "My wedding dress is ruined." I tried to explain. I told her I was sorry, that I didn't mean to, that I was just excited. But she wasn't listening. Her eyes filled with tears, and she ran out of the room. I chased after her, but she slammed the door to her bedroom and locked it. I felt like the biggest piece of crap on the planet. I ruined everything. This was her day. The next few hours were a blur. I called a few emergency seamstresses to try to get the dress fixed, but it was a delicate lace fabric, and nobody could promise me it would be ready in time. The tear was too severe to be repaired overnight. Emma barely spoke to me. She didn't even want me near her when it was time to get dressed for the ceremony. I couldn't blame her. How could I? I had completely messed up, and now she was probably going to hate me forever. The wedding proceeded the next day, and Emma ended up wearing a backup dress. It wasn't as special as the one she had originally picked, but she managed to pull it together. Jack was supportive, but I could tell he was uncomfortable about the whole situation. Everyone at the wedding could tell something was off. The mood was subdued, and Emma barely smiled. At the reception, she and I had a private conversation, where she told me how much I had hurt her. She said she didn't know if she could ever forgive me. It wasn't about the dress, she said, it was about the fact that I had betrayed her trust on such an important day. It was about the fact that I had been irresponsible when she needed me most. To this day, I'm still not sure where things stand between us. Emma and I haven't spoken much since the wedding. She's been cordial, but there's an emotional distance that wasn't there before. I'm doing everything I can to make it up to her, but I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully repair the damage I've done. I just wanted to share this as a warning to anyone who's ever had the privilege of being a maid of honor, or anyone who's ever been given a role of responsibility on someone else's big day. Don't drink too much, and for the love of God, don't mess with the wedding dress. Trust me, you will regret it. I know I will. TIFU by trying to impress my friends with a simple backyard barbecue, and ending up in the ER. So, this happened a couple of weekends ago. I had been planning a simple barbecue in my backyard to impress my friends, you know, the usual hangout with some good food, drinks, and a few laughs. I'm not the most experienced barbecue chef, but I've done a few cookouts before and figured this would be an easy way to make a good impression. The plan was to have a laid-back afternoon, fire up the grill, toss on some burgers and hot dogs, and call it a day. But of course, things got out of hand almost immediately. I started the day by texting my friends, making sure they were all free and ready for some outdoor fun. Everyone was on board, and I even threw in that I'd be grilling some next-level burgers. I figured this was a good way to make myself look like I knew what I was doing. The pressure was on, but I was confident. Little did I know, my confidence would be my downfall. I spent the morning getting everything set up. I had a cooler stocked with drinks, bags of chips, and enough condiments to supply a small army. I also bought some specialty barbecue sauces, thinking it'd elevate the whole experience. It's not a barbecue if you don't have at least 3 kinds of sauce, right? But the star of the show, of course, was going to be the burgers. I'd gone all out and got some high-quality ground beef, none of that pre-made, frozen patty nonsense. I wanted these burgers to be legendary. So, I made the patties myself. I even seasoned them with a special mix of spices I found online. It was supposed to be an easy, fail-proof recipe, but looking back, I definitely overdid it on the seasoning. Everything was ready to go, and I fired up the grill. Now, I've had some trouble with grills in the past. The gas one I was using was a bit old, but I figured it would work fine. The thing took a little longer than I expected to heat up, but no big deal. I set everything up, put on the burgers, and took a few steps back to admire my work. At this point, I was already feeling like the king of the barbecue. As my friends started showing up, I kept busy flipping the burgers, occasionally throwing some hot dogs on the grill for variety. I was making small talk with my buddies, casually pretending to be an expert griller. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until it wasn't. It started with the burgers. They were cooking fast, too fast. I didn't realize that the grill was hotter than I thought. I checked one of the patties and saw that it was starting to char on the outside while still looking raw inside. No problem, I thought, just flip them over, keep an eye on them, and they'll be fine. But as I flipped the burger, I noticed something strange. The grill had a weird, oily residue on it, and the flame was shooting up higher than normal. Okay, I thought, this is fine. Maybe there's just too much grease on the grill. So, I opened the lid to let some of the smoke out. That was the moment I made a mistake I will never live down. As soon as I lifted the lid, a huge burst of flame erupted from the grill. It was like a mini fireball. I yelped and instinctively tried to slam the lid back down, but the fire had already spread too much. It was like a scene straight out of a disaster movie. I panicked, not thinking clearly, and grabbed the nearest thing to put the fire out. That thing? A large bottle of barbecue sauce. In a frenzy, I squirted barbecue sauce all over the flames, thinking it would somehow douse them. Instead, it did the exact opposite. The flames grew even higher, and now the sauce was splattering everywhere, including all over my hands, the grill, and my clothes. I don't know if you've ever tried to put out a fire with barbecue sauce, but I wouldn't recommend it. In the chaos, I started waving my hands around like a madman, trying to avoid getting burned. I knocked over the cooler with drinks, which spilled everywhere, and the next thing I knew, I had flames climbing up the side of the grill. One of my friends, who had seen the fireball, ran toward me and started yelling, "Get the hose." So, like an idiot, I sprinted towards the side of my house to grab the hose. Now, this is where the story gets really bad. In my panic, I didn't realize the ground around my backyard was a little uneven. As I ran with the hose in hand, I tripped over a small rock, and my feet flew out from under me. I landed directly on my back with a loud thud, the hose flopping around in the air like a wild snake. My first instinct was to get up, but that was the moment I realized I had hurt myself. My back was sore, and there was this intense pain in my wrist. I tried to stand up, but I couldn't quite move right. Still, I managed to crawl over to the grill and started spraying the fire with the hose. It worked, eventually. The flames subsided, and the barbecue turned into a smoldering mess. My friends were all standing around, looking both horrified and confused. My wrist was hurting, but I ignored it. I didn't want to seem like a complete mess, so I tried to keep my cool. But as I turned to grab the fallen barbecue tongs, I felt a sharp pain in my wrist again, and I could tell something was wrong. My friend, who had run to get the hose, suggested I go to the ER to get it checked out, just in case. I reluctantly agreed, thinking it was probably just a sprain. But when we got to the ER, it turned out I had fractured my wrist and would need a cast for the next 6 weeks. The barbecue, in the end, was a total disaster. The burgers were ruined, the grill was wrecked, and I ended up spending the rest of the evening at the hospital instead of enjoying time with my friends. Everyone kept trying to cheer me up, but honestly, I felt like a complete failure. I had been trying to impress my friends with a simple barbecue, and instead, I had almost set myself on fire, broken my wrist, and ruined everything. The moral of the story? Maybe stick to a simple picnic next time, or at least get a professional to handle the grill. Oh, and don't ever try to put out a fire with barbecue sauce. I'm still dealing with the broken wrist, but my friends haven't let me live it down. Every time they see me, they remind me of the great barbecue disaster and how I almost burned down the whole neighborhood. TLDR, tried to impress my friends with a backyard barbecue, accidentally started a fire, and ended up breaking my wrist while trying to put it out. Total disaster. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.